It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Studies show that the people who benefit the most from removing the distraction of a smartphone from the school classroom are the students who struggle at school.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Well, Kylie, the topic of smartphones in schools has arisen once again. My friend Madonna King and another wonderful friend of mine, Rebecca Sparrow, have joined forces, and I'm doing some work with them on this, as well as a couple of other people around the country who really care about this issue a lot, to discuss whether or not Queensland should be doing what several other states have now done and bring in a smartphone ban in schools because smartphones cause distraction. I note that while I'm having this conversation with you, you are staring at your screen and not paying attention to what I'm saying. You're literally doing that, and we did not rehearse this, and I'm so upset at you.
I was halfway through watching a recipe.
And look, you haven't even got your microphone in front of your face because you're so distracted by your phone. You have literally just closed the argument for me, and we haven't even started.
Look, I already knew what the answer was from the beginning.
Right. But you literally lived it for me right then. Folks, this is not prearranged. That literally happened. I can't believe you. Hello, my name's Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm here with my somewhat distracted, perpetually on her phone wife, Kylie,
I can't believe you said that.
As we talk about the challenge of smartphones in schools and whether or not they should or should not be banned. I note that you are still, that's right, you're turning it off now. Fantastic. Oh, just as well. We do have some conflict in our home about this, don't we?
A little.
Okay. So Rebecca and Madonna and myself and a handful of others, Michelle Mitchell, are pushing really hard to ban smartphones in Queensland schools, as other states have done. And I thought today it was probably worth just unpacking this a little bit on the podcast and talking about the reason that I'm so against it. And
Against banning it?
No, against smartphones being available in schools. But I just realised we literally have not. I've worked out what I want to talk about. I don't even know your position on this. I don't even know if you agree with me. Should smartphones be in schools? I'd love to get an opinion from you before I share my myriad of reasons and all of the stuff that I want to share here. I've got a lot to say, as you no doubt not going to be surprised about. I'd love to know what somebody who's a mum who doesn't read psychological research thinks about whether or not kids should have smartphones in schools. Like, what's your general take on this?
I think it's absolutely unnecessary, and it causes so much conflict and challenge and exposure for our kids that's completely unnecessary.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So kids are being exposed. I mean, I hear from parents constantly about how their 8-year-olds, their 10-year-olds have been exposed to explicit content because some kid had a smartphone at school or an iPad at school or something like that.
You know, we had a challenging situation on our recent cruise with one of our children. And the comment that you made was you were so grateful that we weren't connected. And as a result, she didn't have access to any social media, which would have just exacerbated the situation.
Yeah, she had a tough time. We ended up saying, look, don't go to the teenage hangout kids club thing today. You can just stay home with us or stay in the cabin with us, come and do our stuff. And especially tonight, you're staying in. And she was really unhappy about it. But having that distance, not having the screen and the connection and the ongoing interaction, it made all the difference.
Outside of all of those things, it's just a distraction, an unnecessary distraction in the learning environment. It's absolutely unnecessary.
Do you have anything that you'd like to add?
No.
Ask me what I think.
What do you think?
Oh, I'm so
Justin?
glad you asked. Did you say, what do you think, Dr. Justin Coulson?
That's what I did say.
Okay, very good. So I have put together a long list of what's going on here. I don't want kids to become smombies. You're looking at me like that's a funny word. Smombie, social media zombie is what a smombie is. You've not heard of a smombie? I'm guessing that's a no. So let's be really clear. As time is going on and research evidence is accumulating, we're starting to see that there are both positives and negatives when it comes to children having access to screens generally, but social media specifically.
Well, most schools these days have laptops. That's the chosen mode of...
A lot of schools are demanding that kids are on a screen, yeah.
So a phone is literally an unnecessary accessory to learning.
This raises an important point in this whole conversation. You can ban smartphones, but kids have still got iPads. They've still got tablets. They've still got computers. So it doesn't completely resolve the issue. Kids are still going to be on screens. They're still going to have access to social media and so on.
Most schools' laptop structures are such that a lot of those things are.
That's right. The school shuts a lot of stuff down, and they've got the resources, the technological resources to do that, or at least to minimize the extent to which kids are doing stuff. Having said that, I remember several of our kids have been able to work their way around this stuff pretty easily, and the school hasn't done anything at all about it, which has driven both you and I up the wall. But here's what research tells us around the different way that social media affects kids. And this is from the kids themselves. So one of the positives is the self-expression that it facilitates and also the validation that kids get. Now, that's both positive and negative. It can be really great for self-esteem and social support and identity experimentation. But the negatives around identity experimentation, social comparison, anxiety, fear of judgment, risky behavior, that kind of thing is challenging. We know that it's bad when it comes to appearance comparison and body ideals. We know that it's bad from the pressure to stay connected, the fear of missing out. We know that that increases distraction. We also know that it's bad from exposure to bullying and harmful content, explicit content, that kind of thing. But the positives around social engagement and peer support are really strong. So the argument that we need to just get rid of it because it's bad doesn't completely stack up. There are some positives as well as some negatives. I guess the big question is to what extent are the positives and negatives affecting schooling? And that's where I really want to go with this conversation. But you're busting to ask me a question.
No, I wasn't going to ask you a question. I was just going to say, well, there are definitely some positives to having it. The reality is they're not big enough to warrant having them on site.
Well, let me share with you a couple of things that I think are fascinating from a research point of view around why I believe that we should be like my position for the last 15 years has been, as a parent, don't ban your kids from X, Y, and Z. When it comes to screens, you can't ban them. It won't work. I still stand by that from a parenting point of view. So I just want to distinguish here. We're not talking about parenting. We're talking about whether mobile phones should be allowed in schools. It's a very different context with completely different objectives and a totally different control structure around it compared to what happens in the family home. I can't be explicit enough about that. You cannot do this at home. It won't work, and I don't think that it's going to be good for your children. But we're talking about an educational context here, and this is why it's different. So I want to start with something really simple. There's this thing that we call the brain drain studies. When we're talking about social media and telephones, there's a whole lot of studies that have been done where literally the mere presence of a telephone on the table distracts people, reduces the quality of interaction socially, empathically. It's associated with decreased capacity for memory, attention, all that kind of thing. If I'm having a conversation with you and you're distracted, even though you're not looking at the phone, simply the presence of the phone, what that does is it makes the experience worse for you and it makes it worse for me. So we've got a whole lot of studies that show just having a phone on the table will do that. Keep the phones off the table. I love that you've literally just put your mobile phone on the floor. So that's the brain drain studies. Here's the next thing. A meta-analysis that was published just in the last year or so showed that phones create distraction, and with that smartphone use, as smartphone use goes up, we see academic performance go down. Now, the effect statistically isn't huge, but it's there. It's present. And this is the bit that gets really important to me. I mean, a meta-analysis is a study of all the studies. It's where we get as many research reports as we can that are relevant and that meet a minimal level of criteria. And then we have a look at what their results are and we work out overall what the results mean. The fascinating part of this is that studies show that the people who benefit the most from removing the distraction of a smartphone from the school classroom are the students who struggle at school. So if we talk about kids who are having a hard time at school, the best thing we can do for them is get the smartphones out of the environment, because a study from Spain showed the most benefits experienced when removing smartphones go to struggling students, and there's also a reduction in bullying. Plus, students highlighted that social interactions improved in a separate study. And fascinatingly, in a qualitative study that I found, kids actually prefer it when phones are out of the environment. which I find extraordinary. They're going to fight tooth and nail saying you can't take our phones away, and they're going to do everything they can to make sure that they can get access to the phones even when we've said no. And yet, they're actually happy when the phones are gone, which I thought was fascinating. Now, here's another study that I think you'll love. Most of the time when studies are done, we say, how much time are you spending on your screen and what are your grades? And so people have to estimate. But if I was to literally ask you to estimate how much time you spend on your screen each day, could you do it? How many hours a day do you spend on your screen?
No, I am actually surprised how much screen time I have, like when I get my weekly analysis.
Yes.
But
and you think to yourself, I can't possibly be spending 5 hours a day on my screen.
But that's because I use Google Maps for everything.
I don't know if it includes Google Maps.
It does.
Right. And podcasts. And so this is the critical thing here. If you're listening to podcasts, if you're using Google Maps, if you've got Spotify playing, should that be counting towards whether or not you're doing well on your GPA with your school performance? Like there are all kinds of things that we use our phones for.
Well, I dare say kids aren't going to have the same.
No, but the point still stands. We use our phones for a multiplicity of actions, for a range of things.
Yeah, but during the school day, there shouldn't be any need for a phone and for any of the things that the phone offers.
All I was going to say is we can't even objectively guess how much time we use per day. Like, we have no idea how much time we spend on it. We have to go and look it up to find it.
Yeah.
But in a lot of the studies, they say, how many hours a day are you spending? And then they correlate that with GPA and they come up with their thing. But a recent study looked at Apple screen time stats. So we got exact numbers, correlated that with GPA. Guess what the research showed?
The greater the use of the phone, the lower their GPA.
Pretty much. That was exactly it. So we see all of these reasons that when it comes to distraction, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to pressure to stay connected, when it comes to bullying, no matter what it is, if you look at it, we see that smartphones are not giving us great things. My argument, this is my summary argument for a smartphone ban in schools. The research shows that when there's less distraction, you get better academic performance. The research shows that when there's less smartphone usage, you get more physical activity. The data shows that you see an increase in in-person social interactions, and those social interactions are improved when smartphones aren't in the picture.
Well, how many times have you walked into a room of teenagers and they're all sitting together, but they're on their phones?
That's exactly
There's no
right.
conversation happening.
But before I summarize my main point and really close this argument down, I just want to acknowledge that there are arguments against a smartphone ban, and they're good arguments. And we need more evidence because we just don't have enough. And those arguments include the value of children being able to communicate with their parents. Like, I've spoken to so many parents who have said, my child has anxiety or my child has specific health needs, and I want them to be able to contact me. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, just go to the office. And I'm kind of generally in agreement with that. But I also understand that in some circumstances, your child being able to access you.
Yeah, but having a few children with access to it is totally different to having a classroom.
But if you have a few
students.
children who have access to it, then all the other students and many parents will get upset about it. So that's a challenge. Another argument against a smartphone ban is that, like, kids do need to learn how to manage themselves in a world full of distractions, because if they go home and they've got access to absolutely everything all the time, the benefit does happen at school. But
there's enough distraction at school without a phone. I was completely distracted as a high school student.
Right, well, so was I.
By how cute my HPE teacher was.
Oh gosh, I can't believe you just said that. That's really, like, in 2023, that's a creepy thing to say. Oh, mind you, it was you saying that about him, not him saying that about you. So there's the cost to the school, to the taxpayer, and we know that kids are going to find a way around it. Like, they just do. They find a way around it. My biggest challenge philosophically is that a ban goes against everything that I believe about what we should and shouldn't be doing. And yet, in this particular context, I think that it makes sense. The last point that I'd make is that the research evidence still isn't that strong. We still really lack good evidence around this, but the evidence is building, and I think that it's strong enough that we should do it. And that the research evidence at the moment is kind of circular. Like, nobody's done an experiment where they've gone into a handful of schools and said, guys, we're going to ban phones in this school as part of an experiment, but we're going to let the schools next door, like those 5 schools over there, they're going to keep their phones, and we're going to compare their results with your results and see what happens with and without phones at school. If we could run some experiments like that, we'd get an answer pretty quickly about what's going on. We'd find out academically, socially, physically, all the ways, whether it's a good or a bad thing. Overall, though, I think it's a good thing. and I think they should be banned. And you know why? Ultimately, it's got nothing to do with all the research evidence. It's just personal preference. And I'll tell you, when we went on our cruise and we were away for a couple of weeks and we had no Wi-Fi, I basically forgot that I had a phone.
How good was that?
And it was so good. There was no distraction. There was no news articles to read, no social media to look at. There was no way for us to communicate with anybody at all about anything. We were just in the moment. When we came home, I don't know if you've noticed. Have you noticed my screen usage since we've gotten home? Have you noticed the way I've been interacting with the screen?
Well, since you haven't been here.
Oh, come on. I've been around a fair bit. I know I've travelled a lot for work, but my interaction with screens, other than when I'm working, obviously
Well, I've been going to bed at 7 o'clock at night, so I actually don't know what your screen usage is. Well, actually, I am going to dob you in. I woke up because you were watching a screen in our bed.
Well, I'm still allowed to watch some TV now and then.
Well, you just asked me. I did notice.
Can't believe you dobbed me in. But I've not been on social media. I haven't been reading the news sites. I've been really present and available, and I've been keeping my phone away. And it's made a huge difference. And that, more than anything, is why I think that kids don't need them, especially at school. So, join the conversation.
Well, I might not be an expert, but I already had that opinion.
Jump over to our Facebook page and let us know what you think. We're asking the question on the Facebook page. We would love to get your idea based on the evidence, based on your experience, based on your overall situation. Should we or shouldn't we? Am I right? Is Beck right? Is Madonna right? Is Michelle right? Are we making...
Am I right?
Is Kylie right? Is Mrs. Happy Families right? Jump over and let us know your thoughts on this, because it is a complicated and nuanced issue. I've got some really smart friends who are aware of the research evidence, and their opinions are not nearly as strong as mine on this. They actually disagree with me, and I think that it's a fascinating conversation. Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families on Facebook to join the discussion. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rawn from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And if you'd like more information about making your family happier, visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.